My guest, Ashley Patek, is here to talk about how to heal your inner child and why that is a courageous act of self love. Ashley is an occupational therapist, a certified parenting coach, and empathic witnessing practitioner, which sounds really interesting. And she helps people redesign the parenting experience, particularly those folks that know that they want to do better. She offers parent coaching and workshops that focus on whole family systems that create a more conscious and connected home. Welcome, Ashley.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, first of all, I'm curious how you got into becoming a conscious parenting coach.
Yes, well, it started with motherhood. I
Right.
saw two pink lines. And when I was pregnant with my first, I have four children. I have two angel daughters and two Earthside sons, both very strong-willed, tenacious, deeply feeling, and they're 4 and 6. But my firstborn was Harlow, and when I was pregnant with her, I knew that there was something inside me that knew I wanted to do things differently
Mm,
than I had received. And not because I had big T trauma or anything like that, but there were certain things that I was aware of that maybe I wanted to try something different. And that's not a sign of shame or blame or criticism to my parents, grandparents, my past lineage. It was just like this whisper in my ear. And somehow that
mm.
whisper led me to taking a course, a positive parenting course. And I learned so much. And what I began to realize is that the way we speak to our kids matters, but also the way
Yeah.
we speak to ourselves matter. And I realized very early on that the way I parent my children would highly depend on how I like materialized and digested how I was raised as a child. I realized very early on that if I wanted to parent my children from a conscious place, there was going to be some reparenting of the child within me. And so,
Mm,
and I was an occupational therapist at the time when I had Harlow and my oldest son, Maddox. And I began getting into, holistic health and looking for a way to marry like my holistic health lifestyle and being a mama with like my career. And, as healthcare began to change, I was also changing and we were changing in different directions. And
sure.
this is when I met Suzanne Tucker from Generation Mindful. And she has, a company where she makes play-based toys to teach kids about their emotions. And I said to her, I'm going to write for you someday. She's like, well, I'm not looking for a writer. And I said, yeah, I know, but I'm going to write. Anyways, long story short, I start writing a few articles for her. Before I know it, I'm her content director, and I'm writing all about parenting. And I said, gosh, I really want to do this on a personal level with families. I want to be able to connect with them in a one-on-one private way. And so that led me to receiving my parent coach certification. And the more that I coached people and families, I really understood more and more of the inner child and how everything that is a barrier with our children today stems from our own childhoods and past experiences. And that
Yeah.
led me to the empathic witnessing certification that I received, which is a trauma-informed somatic experience of witnessing our inner child and
Mm.
meeting those needs, validating that child, and doing everything for that child on that child's terms that wasn't done back then.
Gotcha. So, I mean, for people who don't really know much about like inner child work and stuff, like how do we know our inner child needs something?
Hmm. Well, our inner child is usually coming out when we're feeling some sort of unpleasant emotion, or what some people might say they feel triggered or an
Hmm.
emotional overreaction. So your emotional response to what is happening right now seems out of proportion to what's actually happening. And so
Gotcha.
everything that we're feeling today, all the sensations and emotions that are crystallized within us have a story to tell. They're an echo from the past. So when your husband doesn't do the dishes and you're feeling totally frustrated and you yell at him, well, it's probably not about the dishes. It's probably about whatever story you learned early on about this thing, about not helping out, or whatever limiting beliefs that you may have formed in your early childhood, because that's
Gotcha.
when we're wiring for who we are and how we have to operate.
Okay. So our childhoods affect who we are, how we operate, and how we parent. Do you have anything else you want to say about that?
Yeah, well, our inner child really affects all aspects of our life. So very early on in our childhoods, I mean, from the moment we enter, we are making estimations about how to fit into our first family system. Just as we're dependent on our parents for food and shelter, we're dependent on them for attachment, which means we are requiring close proximity to our primary caregivers in order to feel safe. You know, early in the hunter and gatherers, we had to physically and emotionally be safe and close to our caregivers. Otherwise, we'd be like the saber-toothed sponge. And so while everything has changed as far as our circumstances, the wiring's still the same. And so very early on, we're saying, well, what do I have to do to stay close to my parents? Which parts of me do I have to grow? Which parts of me gives me connection and smiles and hugs and love and acceptance? And which parts of me does my system want me to put away? Which parts gets me the side eye, gets me sent to my room, gets me punishment, blame? And so that is how we start to collect data about who we are. And because as children, we're designed to make things make sense, if we are met with shame, we grow up learning how to do that for ourselves. If we grow up with punishment, we grow up thinking, well, I did bad, therefore I am bad. And so we start to build these belief systems. And it becomes like an Instagram filter. It's this mask that we wear. It's us, but underneath that mask is really the authentic us that we've learned to shift and adapt to be who our family system wants and needs us to be. And when you stay unconscious of this, what happens is we grow up thinking that this is our identity. We attract certain relationships and are attracted to certain relationships. We're attracted to certain careers. We tell ourselves certain things. Some of us have coping mechanisms because we've really had intense survival adaptations we learned early on. So we might drink, or we might move into bulimia, or we might self-sabotage or be a people pleaser. There's so many different things that stem from who we are, and we claim them as our identity because these parts of us were sent to protect us. And so they come up and they get loud when there is something that happens in the right now moment that brought you stress as a child. Yeah, and so they're helpful and protective, and they're a little weary to let those survival adaptations go in the now moment because they're trying to keep you alive.
So when we're experiencing those strong emotions and triggers, right? And so first of all, I want to ask, why is it that the people that are closest to us, like our partner and our kids, why do they seem to trigger things the most? And then a follow-up question, like, what can we do to soothe that or work with that child in that triggered moment?
Yeah, so those are great questions. First, it is very often the people we care about the most that trigger the attachment lessons that we learned back then. So, for example, your children come into this world very whole and complete, as we did. And so they are, by default, a mirror for us, reflecting back all parts of us. Some parts of us that we can identify with, and some parts of us that we're like, whoa, that feels really threatening. Because when I threw a meltdown in Target aisle 5, I was grabbed by the arm and ripped out and spanked, or, told told like, that is not okay. Like you can't cry. So like I learned to closet that part of me. So here comes my child doing those things. And my brainstem is going, alert, alert, threat,
Right.
threat, trigger, trigger. Now, clearly what our 3-year-old is doing, that meltdown is very developmentally appropriate for where they are. And also our response is developmentally appropriate for where we are, because we learned early on when we were 3, that wasn't allowed. And so no one can teach you impulse control. If you were never taught you don't have impulse control, no one can teach you how to be with anger and sadness. You know, you can't learn how to do that if nobody taught you how to be with those parts of yourself. So now you're an adult with no better skills than you were when you were 2, 3, 6, 10.
Yeah.
So our children trigger us because they represent the wholeness that we had to abandon in part. So they are definitely invitations and portals to our healing if we accept the invitation. And with our partners, it's quite interesting because our partners and our friends, we tend to attract people unconsciously that allow us to play the role that we always played. So, you know, if I, like, for example, I'll give you an example. So there's different attachment types, and I won't go too far into them. There's the secure attachment, the creme de la creme, the queen bee that we all want to be. Most of us aren't, you know. And then there's 3 insecure attachment types. I am an anxious attachment type. I had parents as a kiddo who they could be either really nurturing or very like cold and dismissive and validative, gaslighting. I was responsible for their feelings, that kind of thing. So fast forward, I grow up and I want to be loved. I need that validation. I fear abandonment, rejection. Not so much anymore. I'm working on it, but that's the code. My husband is an avoidant attachment style. He learned very on, you don't feel. You feel happy, you feel calm, that's it. Anything else doesn't exist. You better take care of yourself. And if you need me to help you, I guess I will. Like, it was an inconvenience. He had to basically raise himself. He learned to be very independent. And so he learns to keep people at a distance, you know? And interestingly enough, avoidant attachment types and anxious attachment types, they typically attract one another. And
a lot,
so,
yeah.
So much. And so as you can imagine, that's triggering. I went from him what he was taught not to give, and I'm, you know, so we play off each other, and it can be incredibly triggering to one another's systems. I think that's why so many relationships can go south, and I think it's why some people get into a habitual routine of chasing a certain type of person that they know isn't maybe best for them.
Yeah, I mean, I could go on about relationships. It's kind of one of my specialties, and absolutely, I believe what you said about kids is true for your partner. That relationship with the right person can actually be the thing that helps to heal and create a balm for that, you know, broken part of us in our attachment style. And you know, it's interesting how we have these patterns from our family of origin, and we recreate those. You know, I can't tell you how many times I was in relationships with people who were emotionally unavailable. Give you one guess why. So it wasn't until I had awareness around that pattern that I was able to shift it consciously. Like, I could be dating someone totally interesting and have the realization that they were emotionally unavailable, and I could change my mind. I didn't have to follow that route. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up about the patterns and the attractions and the attachment theories, because I think you're right. Almost always I hear about people who are avoidant and who are anxious that are like together.
And you know, I'm sorry. I was going to say, it's just interesting because I was raised in a household, you love hard and you fight hard. And so I've always been attracted to relationships that were love hard, fight hard. My husband comes in, who's, you know, the man who's now my husband, and he didn't play that game. Like, that wasn't something that he did. He just loved unconditionally. I think that's why we were able to work through our different attachment styles, is beyond my brother who passed away and maybe my kids and my grandmother who's also passed away. My husband was the first person who I felt like really saw me and loved me unconditionally. And I remember when we first got together, because he was such a different he was such a different style, flavor than I usually went for, I would do what many of us do. I don't think we're compatible. I don't know. We don't have the passion. I think it's kind of boring, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just thought it was interesting because we try to talk ourselves out of something. And I say this all to bring up a point that discomfort, we usually associate discomfort as a negative thing or a bad thing or a sign that we're not supposed to be going down this path. But I invite everyone listening to think about discomfort perhaps through a new lens, which is maybe discomfort is a sign that you are recreating circuits and that you're telling those protective parts, I hear you, I hear your message, I thank you for your years of service. And I'm going to ask you to step back for a moment to hear some of these other parts, because maybe, just maybe, this is going to take me down a path that is okay and safe for me, that might actually even be better for me, healthier for me. And so that is what happened. And I think these protective parts, they're always looking forward, like a mama bear protecting her cub. They're not looking back to see that you're not 3-year-old Ashley anymore. I'm now 37, but this protective part doesn't know that. She still thinks I'm, 3, 5, 10, and dependent on a family system. So I just think that those are really important points when we're talking about the inner child, is to know that there's different parts of you. They're all here working for you. And so you had once asked some tools for reparenting. And I think that that's one of them, is talking to the parts that live within you.
Talking to the parts that live within you. Yeah. So like just having like a quiet moment and just be like, okay, little one that got triggered and butt hurt over that. So what do you need right now?
Yeah.
What are you trying to protect me from? Oh, okay. Well, I don't actually need that, but I appreciate you. Is that the kind of inner dialogue you're suggesting?
Yeah. So this would be done in a moment outside a moment of dysregulation, because it's really hard sometimes when we're in our brainstem to think like, oh, hi, part of me that it can be a little tricky. Yeah. So this as you practice it, you might be able to do it in the moment of dysregulation. But to start, I invite you to do it in a moment of reflection. And it might be, so say that you're somebody who's a worrier, you're always worrying. You can talk to that part of you because it really just wants to be heard and to tell its story.
Okay.
And when we allow it to tell its story, then it's willing to take a back seat. When we tell that part of us, I'm not going to be a person who worries anymore. I'm not going to be a mom who yells. I'm not going to be a person who does X, Y, and Z. And we exile this part of us, well, then it's going to just keep getting louder because it was designed to protect you. So what a dialogue might look like is, add a little humor, if you want. Oh, hi, worried voice, it's you again. Hi, old friend. Like, yes, I hear you. You want me to be really worried about this. And also, I know there's a part of me that can think through this, that can do hard things. And I'm going to let that part come to the mic for a moment. So I'm just going to ask you to step back. I hear you. You're still at the table. But I'm just going to hear some other parts. So if you think of it like you're the CEO and all these other parts are at the table and you get to direct them, and decide who gets to come to the mic and who gets to sit down. I've actually taught this to my kids. They have perfect boy voice. Oh, hi, part of me that ripped up the paper because I drew out of lines. Like, I see you. Okay, well, I just want to let you know everything's safe. And please take a back seat. And so we practice it with them too, but it's just acknowledging those parts. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What you're saying goes in line with that old trope that what we resist persists, but when we reach out in love and acceptance and it sounds like to a certain degree integration by giving by making their voice heard, then it becomes quieter and more manageable, more solvable.
Yeah. And I like to say this to whatever part I'm speaking to. I see you. Thank you for your years of service. And
Mhm.
now I'm going to do a few small experiences to try something different. It might feel uncomfortable. I know you're going to want to get loud. I know. I hear you, and I'm now 37, and I'm going to do this. Like, so I, again, just take a little step back. You're still at the table. You're just not at the head of the table, because I am. And that's what all these parts want. They want to
Yeah.
be able
Okay.
to trust the big self, which is, capital S self, which is you, your authentic you. But over time, it's learned that the self wasn't in control. It had to do all these protective parts, and these parts have been pulled out of their normal roles into roles they don't even really want to do, to
Mm.
keep you in survival. This is part of like internal family systems. And so it is known that we are all made of multiple parts. And when we understand that, then we don't become just one part. We don't just become the loudest part. We don't become, oh, she's a perfectionist. Oh, she's a people pleaser. Oh, she's a self-sabotager. Well,
Right.
that's one part of you that learned to speak up and act in a way for your survival. And when we get curious about why that part had to get so loud, then it starts to tone down a bit and make space for the other version, the other parts that are you.
Yeah. When you were saying that just now, I had a picture of like a gemstone, a cut gemstone,
Mm,
and no jewelry person looks at just one particular facet of the gemstone. Like they
yeah.
look deep into it, and there might be an occlusion there, and they'll look at another facet that might have like a little rainbow and collect more light, and
Yeah.
like it's just this, it's still the gemstone, but we don't just look at that one specific part of it. We look at the all of it, and we see the beauty in all of it.
That's a
And
beautiful analogy. Yes.
yeah. Yeah. So could you tell us a little bit more about the whole family system, like what that means, what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what I noticed early on, even as an occupational therapist, as an OT, I worked in schools and I worked in a lot of different facilities. But when I worked with the children, I noticed a pattern. And as I became a parent and then again a parenting coach, I noticed a pattern that today's society and culture, and I think for many in the past, took a very behavior centric approach, which
Mm.
meant the child who is 3 and has poor impulse control and poor emotional regulation and hit, well, then we better get them under control. Would they stop right there at the behavior and not getting curious as to what's underneath the behavior, not becoming curious as to, well, why did they hit? Well, developmentally, they don't have the skills. They have an unmet need because they're overtired. They're feeling really angry and they don't know how to process that. So there's all these roots, underneath the behavior. And there's also a tendency, and some past parenting practices to say, like, if my child is bad, then I'm
Mm.
doing bad, which for many of
Yeah.
us triggers the thought that we had as a child, which is, when I did bad, then I was bad. And now here's my child doing bad, reaffirming the fact that I am bad. And so we enter this fear shame cycle within ourselves, and we attempt to control or use fear-based tactics because maybe that's what was done to us, and that's what, we we give out what we were modeled to sometimes.
Hmm.
And like, or we don't have any other skills, or we're just so in our reactive brain that we're reacting and we want to get it under control and contain the fire, which is our child, in
Yeah.
that moment.
In the
Right?
moment,
In the moment, that
the
is the fire.
meltdown on aisle 3, the fire.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We just want to extinguish it. And so
Mhm.
we want to control or stop at the behavior and speak only to the behavior. The thing is, we are the sturdy leaders as parents. Like, we set the thermostat in our home. And when we can recognize that we're here as a growth partner for our child, and we stop trying to control and dominate them. And what I
Mhm.
also realized is that when we work with our inner child, and reclaim the wholeness that is us, then we give our children the freedom to maintain their authenticity. And so I'm working with all of me to see and respond to all of my child, all of who my child is. And that's how I can access the conscious discipline tools. But if I'm moving from a place of my limiting beliefs, my shame and fear stories, and my perception, then I'm seeing my child as I was conditioned to be, not as they truly are. And I will slowly chip away at their unique throbbing signature, as has been done to me. And they will begin to shift to fit into now my family system. This is how cycles perpetuate. It's very unconscious. But when we become more clear and conscious about ourselves, we can then respond to our children more consciously. And so when I say that I work with the whole person, the whole child, the whole family system, it's a rewriting of that narrative that who our children are, or what our children do is our report card. What our children do is their report card. And it doesn't look at the bad kid, the manipulative kid, the hard to parent kid as the problem. It really looks at them and pulls them in and says, wow, I'm so glad you're here, because you are giving us information about the system at large and how that operates, because you are reflecting back different parts of it. And so when you look at it as a whole family system to heal together, then the whole family system heals together.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Yeah. I remember as a kid being a difficult child, not understanding that, well, actually I was a somewhat traumatized child and also a neurodiverse child. But what you said there about the children being our report card, like, absolutely, I think that is very ingrained in that, I want to say, older style of parenting. Because, what I did was a reflection of my parents, and whether or not they could control me, or, whether or not they taught me right or whatever. And, but, I was just being me,
Right.
I will say that on the flip side of that, as a parent who has grown in consciousness, my first child has a couple times in the past called herself the first pancake, because they never turn out just right. But I look at her like, wow, she really has taught me how to parent, and I've grown so much in my parenting. But if I had had someone like you when she was little, or when I was thinking about having a kid or something like that could have changed the game for both her and I, and one of the things that in my adult life has been hardest for me to heal is the regrets, as I've gained consciousness of how I've parented in the past. So, but you know what, like, the kids, they don't want your regret, like, they just want your love. Like, it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter even as they age. Like, she's 25 now. She doesn't want my regret. She just wants things to be okay.
Right. And you can't grow from a place of shame. And
right.
And the cool thing is too, is like, once that's something I focus on, and with what I do is like helping parents forgive their parenting past. We are all doing the best we could with the tools, resources, time that are available to us.
Absolutely.
And people will say, well, am I screwing up my kids? Like, I did this, and did I mess up my kids? Well, I had a parenting coach once tell me long ago, Ashley, we're all messing up our kids a little bit. So take a deep breath. It's going to be fine. And I'm like, yeah,
everybody, could you imagine if there was a child out there with a perfect childhood, who they're going to grow into be? I don't know. I
don't think it exists. And so she's like, you'll be paying for a therapy bill either way. And I was like, that's kind of funny, but also true. And it takes the pressure off a little bit.
Yeah.
But the other really amazing thing that wasn't really done that I can remember in my childhood, and I would, from what I'm talking to other people, maybe not done in past generations of parenting, is repair. And that's not coming from a place of shame, but it's taking what was a really hard emotional moment or maybe we didn't act as our highest and best, and to call it out and take responsibility for it and say, hey, last year, last week, yesterday, 5 minutes ago, when this thing happened and I yelled, yeah, you know what? I'm still working on my big feelings too. And I'm not always going to get it right. I'm not always going to move from my center. And I just want to let you know that that wasn't about you. That's
I
about
love
the
that.
things I'm working on.
Yeah.
And I often tell my kids, like if I'm overwhelmed or something, I'll say, I'm feeling really frustrated. Like I see a mess everywhere and there is something inside me when I see chaos, I panic. This isn't your fault. It's not for you to fix it. I just want to let you know because I might seem a little more cactus-like, a little more prickly. I just want to put it out there. It's not your fault. It's not for you to fix it. And what research has shown is that when we make a repair with our kids, it doesn't matter if it happened 5 minutes ago or 5 years ago. When we take what could be a moment that was filled with shame or again, not our highest and best, and we create a new narrative around it and we build connection around it, we actually reshape the brain and recirculate it. So it builds a new memory. And storytelling is really beautiful in that way because it integrates both the right and left sides of the brain, the logical of what happened and the emotional of how we felt about it. And we're creating a new circuit because now we're filling it with more connection or play or silliness and safety. We're creating some internal safety around it. And so I think that's a powerful parenting tool.
Yeah, I love all that you said there, especially the fact where when you said, I might be a little bit more like a cactus, it might be a little prickly, and the I'm still working on my big feelings too, because I think that that gives kids permission that they don't always have to be perfect. They don't always have to speak exactly what they need. They don't, like they can make mistakes and have an emotional outburst, and they'll still be loved and recognized as a precious child who's developing,
Exactly. Yeah. We all seem to want to be this perfect parent, we shame ourselves and guilt ourselves when we're not. But our children really grow and get the freedom to be who they are when we show them our humanness, when we show them our mistakes, when we show them we mess up and we normalize it. Like when we make it safe for ourselves to be a human, a soul in a human experience, we make it safe for them too. But if we're always having to be a certain way and then we're self-shaming and blaming ourselves in front of our kids when we're not that way, they learn how to do that because more is caught than taught. So we can say all the things, but if we're not being that for ourselves, we cannot be that for our children. We cannot be a gentle parent if we can't be a gentle person to ourselves. We can't.
That's really important for people to hear. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Deeply important because we think we're doing this thing, but really it's kind of a front, a false front. Like, if we can only, of course I can give and give and give, but if I'm treating myself poorly, then people can sense that there's something going on that's not authentic there. And it creates that feeling of not feeling safe.
Exactly. Our children are so authentic, they can sniff out our inauthenticity. And so if what mama is saying and what is actually happening are two different things, then I start to question if I can trust that, or I question myself. Like, maybe I've got it all wrong. And so we either learn to not trust the other relationship or we learn to not trust ourselves. And so, it's like when you're doing the whole like validating your child thing, people say, well, I'm validating my child. And so through gritted teeth and tense posture, we're like, yes, it makes sense that you're so angry. Like, I'm here for you. Well,
I love you. Gosh darn it.
through gritted teeth. It's like, they can sniff all of that out. And so again, that's where it really comes back into a very parent-centric approach. That is what I'm taking. Yes, people come to me because they want to talk about their children, and they end up finding out we're talking a lot about them and the child within. Yes, we talk about your child, but you first must understand who you are now and what, like, the origin story of that, to be able to see your child in all their wholeness. And many times, a lot of the pain points and problem areas within a home begin to dissipate when we just do the first piece. And then we can go into understanding our child, accepting who they are, not from our lens of who we think they should be, but who they truly are, and supporting them on that journey. And then the last layer for me outside of that is giving those conscious discipline tools. How do I set boundaries with my child without squashing their desires and wants? How do I validate my child while also setting a boundary? How do I insert more play? How do I, whatever it is, what do I do when my kid does this? So all of these different things, but they layer upon each other. And so going back in the beginning, we talked about this behavior-centric model where we want to control. Our goal of it working was our kids doing what we want them to do right now and to obey and be obedient. But then they grow up and we wonder why they can't think for themselves while they give into peer pressure and all these different things. So we're moving from that to this parent-centric approach that says, I'm the sturdy leader. I'm going to be the guide by the side for my children, their growth partner. My goal is not to control them because I only control my own thoughts, feelings, words, and actions.
The guide by the side.
Yeah.
Wow, that's lovely. Yeah. Love
Thank
that.
you.
Okay, so conscious parenting is becoming conscious of how you operate as a parent and why, and working through that and reparenting yourself to a certain extent and continuing that process because it's not one and done.
Right.
And then I just want to say there's no such thing as perfection. Perfection is a fallacy. No one is a perfect person. No one is a perfect parent. No one is a perfect child. And so why front? Why try? Just be real.
I am a parent coach, but someone's got to coach the coach sometimes. Like, I am not a perfect parent, and I talk about that too. I think it's important, just as it's important for our kids to see our humanness, it's important for other parents to see the humanness. This whole social media culture that only captures the perfectly clean house and the kids who are perfectly dressed and the perfect meals and the perfect activities. The same society and culture we are trying to fit into as parents, and I would dare to say especially as mothers, is the same one that profits off of our insecurities, exhaustion, and not enoughness. So let's create a new culture where we can keep it real with each other and talk about, yes, the great points, the beautiful points, but also the messy parts, because we're all in this parenting journey together, but yet we're doing it alone. The days of a tribe, like, where is the tribe? Where is the support system? I'm glad you brought that
up. Yeah, I was just getting ready to go there. So I'm so glad that you brought that up, because like there are times as a parent where you're just like, I need a timeout and I need someone else to come and watch the kids while I do a reset, or I could use a little support, and we just don't have that in our culture anymore. And I do think that there's something to be said about social media as like a pretend community. Yes, there's some great things about it. Yes, it brings people from far away together. Yes, it brought us together, right?
Yeah, I know.
But it's not a real community, and because we have this like artificial community, we don't notice that we don't have the real community, and that's why people are feeling divested, and why people are feeling othered, and why people are othering, and why there's bullying rampant, and all kinds of issues, because we're not having these conversations with each other. We're not sitting in each other's homes and sharing stories. So, find your community of parents.
Right. Absolutely. Because parenting can feel really hard, arguably one of the hardest jobs, and we're learning on the go. It doesn't matter if you have one kid or multiple kids, we're learning as we go, because as you know, each
Yeah.
subsequent child is different and requires some
They're
different
so
tools.
different.
And
And each
um,
stage is different. I mean, I've got two that are adults, and I'm just gonna say the parenting job never ends. For people who want to have kids, it never ends.
yeah,
It's not done.
it's not done at 18. It just keeps going.
Yeah,
I
just
know.
different.
I told
Yeah.
myself, I told my husband, actually, I was like, after we had our boys, I said, I guess I never fully really understood how I would never sleep sound again. Like when I have kids, it was a commitment to never sleep sound again. Like even when they're like sleeping through the night or whatever, it's like I'm still, or I'm in the shower and I hear phantom screams and I'm like, in my towel, is everyone okay? I'm like, well, I think I've signed up for this for life. Like I didn't really realize that part of it.
And then they move out of the house and you're like, are they okay?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm
Yeah.
most terrified for that. But yeah, I think finding your support is so important. And adding to that, being able to ask, to make it okay and safe for a mother, a father, a caregiver, however you identify, to say, I'm really struggling. I love my kids. So I always say two things are true, and especially in parenting. I love my kids and I need a break. I'm a good mom and I'm feeling overwhelmed.
Mm,
I am capable and I need some help. And so
mhm.
two things can often be true. And so how amazing if we had a culture that made it safe to say those truths and to be received. We will take you in. We hear you. We hear
Yeah.
your battle cry. You are needing some help. And it is okay to ask for that, because we, again, are wired from society and maybe even from your first child homes that needing and wanting was bad.
Mm.
You want this? No, you can't have this. No, I told you already. You can't have a cookie. You can't have a cookie, Ashley. Like, quit asking. Okay, I get it. You're frustrated. You're setting a boundary. It's no, but I'm also internalizing when I'm talking to you like that my needs and wants are bad, and like just quiet that part. And
Yeah.
so that's a very small example, but it keeps building, and over time, even if we can understand what we need, which some of us aren't even there, where we're like, I don't even know what I need. But even if
Yes.
we know what we need, we have been so conditioned that wanting more is a selfish act, that wanting something and asking for it is selfish. And so we've learned that you're either selfish, like because you've asked for help or because you want to have a little time or whatever it is, or you're selfless and you're all in and you're giving and giving and giving without a break.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no nuance in there. There's no
Right.
gray area. Like life is gray. There's like very little black and white. Yeah.
Yeah.
Parenting is so rewarding and precious. Being a parent, it's an honor and it's really, pardon me, fucking hard. It's like the hardest fucking thing I've ever done.
Yeah. Amen. Solidarity. I feel you. It's not
Okay,
easy.
so I want to ask you, so in the moment, what of the heat of the triggers in the emotional dysregulation, what in the moment can people do um, to process through that? What are some
Sure.
tools that they can use?
Well, I would say that everyone's tools are unique to them,
Okay.
but because different things will soothe our nervous system. So, for example, so I'll give you what works for me, and then I'll give you some other examples. So, for me, if I can start to feel it in my body,
Mhm.
that's like a warning sign. So, just one thing I do proactively, um, which helps me in the moment, is let's say it's the end of the night and I just take a couple minutes to reflect about my day. And I say, okay, well, what was something that I felt triggered by? Well, my son, I asked my son multiple times to do something, he didn't listen. and I yelled at him. Okay, well, what sensation did I feel? Well, I felt like this pulsing in my chest. Okay, pulsing in my chest. Well, what emotion did I feel? I felt angry. Okay, well, angry is a secondary emotion. What could have been underneath that? Well, I felt like he didn't care about what I was saying. Okay, well, where did I hear that story before? And that helps me go back to the inner child. Okay, so fast forward to the next day, the same thing's happening. But now, because I've reflected on it, I'm already noticing that sensation in my chest, and that anger, and that not being able to be heard, and that limiting belief. I'm like, oh, there you are. Okay, I know what's coming. My body will go 0 to 10 and I will yell. So sometimes when I'm on my A game, I can intervene right there. And maybe I take some deep breaths. I say, you know what, Mom's going to take a little moment to myself. My body needs some quiet right now. And I'll take a couple minutes to breathe in the bathroom or step outside. Sometimes, though, I'm not able to notice those signs because I'm so caught up in the emotional whirlwind. And so one thing that I do is I take my hand to my heart and to my belly. The heart is a regulatory position. And I begin to just slowly breathe. I close my eyes and I tell myself whatever I need to hear. This is not an emergency. This will pass. I'm a good mom with good kids. I can get through this. Whatever I need to hear. Sometimes if I'm so overwhelmed, I'm doing the bumblebee breath. I put my thumbs in my ears like a child, and I put my hands and I do the zzz, and my kids actually usually stop and do it with me. But it helps block out. It's a sensory thing. It helps block out all the other stimuli around you so that you can go inside your body. Sometimes I crank up some music and I just start shaking out my body. And my kids think I'm bizarre, but it's like I imagine myself shaking out all that emotion, all those limiting beliefs, or I brush it off. And so those are some of my favorite tools to do. Again, stepping outside, doing different things like that. And because in my family system, there was a lot of yelling, my impulse is to yell. And I think that's a common.
Yeah, it is.
And there is a tool that, again, I used to say, I'm not going to be a mom who yells. But then you're exiling that part of you, and she just yelled louder. She's like, yes, sis, I'm coming out. So, and there's this tool that you can do where you kind of stand and put your hands on your thighs, and you just kind of bounce up and down, and you go, And I would start to do that right as I was getting that urge to yell. And what that does, instead of letting it come up and out, it moves it down through the body to Mother Earth to be transmuted. Same urge, different direction. And I noticed that after I started doing that for a few weeks, I really didn't have to do it anymore, because that sensation, I was able to almost override it and easier access some of these other tools. And again, my kids thought it was a little silly, but sometimes when you do something, two things happen when you model an emotional regulation skill. Sometimes they just are so caught off guard that you're doing something that it creates enough space into what's happening, what they're doing, and how you respond, that the moment can regulate. But two, you are modeling. Again, more is caught than taught. You are showing them how to access these tools for themselves when they are feeling dysregulated. And so I have seen my 6-year-old do the yelling thing. I've seen my 3-year-old do the bumblebee when he's had about enough of his brother. Well, he's almost 4. I called him 4 earlier. He'll be 4 in a week and a half. But so yeah, there's all sorts of tools. And so what I invite listeners to do is have a little fun. Do it in a moment of calm and what feels good to your body, and explore the different senses. Maybe it's going and lighting some aromatherapy, some, essential oils. Maybe, like I said, it's stepping away. Just explore the different senses and see what feels good for you. But for me, it's that yelling hack, the moving my body, and the deep breaths and affirmations.
Yeah. Those are all such great. It sounds like there's like a myriad of tools
Mm,
out there. Like
there
just
is.
you just finding what works for you and like you said, modeling that in the moment. It's almost a bit of a repair attempt.
Hmm.
Looking at it, because I'm like again, I specialize in relationships, and it seems like like if you were to be arguing with your partner, if and you started doing that instead of yelling, it would almost be taken as a repair attempt because I'm like, I'm not gonna go there. We're gonna
Hmm.
fix, we're gonna work through this, and I'm shifting my behaviors consciously right now. Um,
Exactly.
so super fantastic. Not for nothing, when you start noticing that like those body sensations of the racing heart and the flushing and the rise and you know, it, the rise in heat, those are all physiological symptoms of the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. And scientifically, we're told that it takes 20 minutes to completely reset that.
Mm.
So, you know, while these things can really, really help and could make it much, much faster, it could help you process within a few minutes and de-trigger that. But for otherwise, just stepping away outside of
Right.
the situation and taking that 20-minute time out for yourself to reset, not to rehash, but to reset. Um, would be super helpful as well. But
Yeah.
I feel like everyone needs to know that there's like a timer on us, like when we're feeling that, like, oh, okay, I need to go and breathe. I need to go and dance it out. Dancing is beautiful. Like
Hmm.
they say that, I don't know who they are, but there's a lot of people that say that like dancing and singing are two of the things that switch energy and emotion fastest.
Yeah, we're
Um,
emotions. They're meant to have, our emotions are meant to have
motion.
motion. Yeah.
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 And I think it's important to say too, like, figure out your toolbox outside of the moment. Like, you're not
Yeah.
building your toolbox as you're about to flip your lid. That is not the time. Like, build the brain circuits beforehand and grow those tools over time so that you can access them when you need them. So practice them and play with your kids. We practice dancing and shaking out and doing all sorts of things. We practice breathing and all sorts of things outside of the moment of dysregulation so that we can wire for when we are dysregulated. Um,
Mm. And your
and I,
bedtime practice of self-reflection, that is super tremendous as
mm,
far as like gaining self-awareness of what did affect me, how did I respond, what could I do otherwise next time? Like, because if we don't know, and in that moment when we're in the trigger, we often don't know like what we need, what we can do, what our tools are. The toolbox goes out the window
mhm.
sometimes, but the more we can self-reflect and self-assess, the more we are self-aware in the moment, what I need, what I want, how my body is experiencing this moment. Like then that helps us to stay on top of things a little bit more and process through things with just a little bit more ease.
Yes, absolutely. Because the thing is, when we're dysregulated, we're up and out of our body,
Mhm.
right? But if we start to say, oh, yeah, I remember that I had a pattern of feeling this in my chest and it was associated with this emotion, it's drawing us back down into our body, right?
Yeah.
Down into the body. And so most of us don't even really realize like what our body feels like when we feel certain emotions. And most of us don't really know what certain emotions truly feel like besides happy, sad, calm, and mad. Um, and so there's all sorts of emotions, and I invite you to play. It's a playground. Play in it and explore and take note. Journal about it if you need to. And I wanted to share one last tool
Please.
for if you don't mind. And I say this to my kids, but I definitely say this with my husband. And it is this, and it's just as much for me as it is for the other person. And I got this from Brene Brown, so this isn't something that I can take credit for. But the story that I'm telling myself is
Mhm.
before I go into whatever it is. So the story that I'm telling myself is that I was up with the boys all night and you went into the other room and got a really good night's sleep, and I'm feeling really salty about that. And what this little preface does is it lets me know, okay, I'm telling him how I feel from the lens of how I see things.
Yeah.
And I'm letting him know the same thing. She's telling me how she feels from her lens, knowing that there is other possibilities there besides just the way I see it. Because then he's like,
Yes.
well, the story I'm telling myself is that you told me just to get out of the room because the boys wanted to sleep with you. And so I did. And I was like, I need to talk to tired me. Like, I need to let him know. But it's just a really good tool. And I use that with my kids too. Because we do
Yeah.
a lot of work about talking about just because you believe and see something one way doesn't mean that people don't see it a different way. And so it creates room for possibility.
Oh, yes, yes. I think that we could use a lot more of that in our
Mm.
society, much more. Like there's not ever a single side of a story, but there is the story that I'm telling myself. There is
Sure.
definitely my perspective, which is real and valid.
Yes. Yes.
And times how many people on the planet.
Right. Yeah. And it helps us get a little less defensive and reactive when we realize that, hey, the story they're telling themselves has to do with them. The way people treat you is really more indicative about their own experience. And so, you know, I could have just yelled at my husband and he would have been like, yeah, the story she's telling herself is she's really pissed. And, but I didn't want to lead with that. And what really happened is we worked out a really great plan because we were able to stay in our bodies and have a conversation and communicate. And so I know it might sound a little silly, the story I'm telling myself is, but for us, it really works. And we do it with our kids and it creates it plants the seed that what I'm about to say feels really real for me, but I also know it may not be true for you. So I'm going to give a little space so you can share your truth, knowing that somewhere in the middle is probably what really is.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. So, Ashley, I just have really liked this conversation, and I am so grateful for you being here and sharing your wealth and wisdom.
Thank you.
Please let people know how they can find you.
Yeah, so you can find me. My website is parentsdoingbetter.com. We have a supportive Facebook group for everyone in the community. It's called Is This Normal? Conscious Parenting. Yeah, like it's like, don't we all know, like, is this normal? Like,
Yeah. I think that's like the ongoing question that all parents have.
Right, right. And so through that Facebook group and through the website, you can join the newsletter where I drop regular tips and tricks and share stories. You can get onto my social medias from that, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, which TikTok, I don't know. I just learned about TikTok, so I'm not saying that, but whatever. So yeah, but parentsdoingbetter.com, because we are all committed to doing a little better. And, I'm your guide by the side. We're doing better together.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Thanks again, Ashley.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate you.